She was the little girl behind the mask, the one the world watched grow up in flashes of camera light, always clutching her father's hand, always hidden, always protected. For years, Paris Jackson existed in the shadow of the most famous man who ever lived, a shadow so vast, so consuming, that when it suddenly disappeared, it nearly took her with it. She attempted to end her life, not once, but multiple times. She told the world she just wanted to be with him again. But beneath the grief, beneath the silence she had kept for so long, there was something else. Secrets, truths, confirmations of everything we had quietly suspected for years. Now at 26, Paris Jackson is finally speaking, and what she has admitted changes everything we thought we knew. Michael Jackson did not simply occupy a place in music history. He rewrote it entirely. From the moment he stepped into the spotlight as a child prodigy to the day he stood alone atop the world as the undisputed king of pop, he captivated humanity in ways no artist before or since has managed to replicate. Decades after his death, his music still plays on every continent, his image still adorns walls in every language, and his name still sparks debate in every corner of the globe. He was a phenomenon, a contradiction, a genius wrapped in mystery. But to one person on this earth, none of that mattered. To Paris Jackson, Michael was simply Dad. He was warm hands, a soft voice, bedtime stories, and fried chicken. He was the man who made her feel like the most important person in the world, not because of what he was, but because of who he chose to be when no one was watching. What no one realized at the time was just how deeply that relationship would define everything that came after. Paris Michael Catherine Jackson was born on April 3, 1998, at Spaulding Payne Medical Clinic in Beverly Hills, California. She entered the world as the cherished daughter of Michael Jackson and his former wife, Debbie Rowe. Her name was not chosen casually. It was the product of a promise, one made years before her birth between Michael, his sister LaToya, and socialite Kathy Hilton. The agreement was simple. If a daughter came into their lives, she would be named Paris. It was a pact forged in hope, a name that carried the weight of expectation and the lightness of love all at once. Paris herself was conceived in the city her name honors, adding a layer of poetic symmetry to a life that would rarely be ordinary. Within her family, Paris held a singular position. She was the middle child and the only daughter, nestled between her older brother Michael Joseph Jackson Jr., known to the world as Prince, and her younger half-brother, once called Blanket and now going by Biggie. When Michael and Debbie Rowe divorced in 2000, he was awarded full custody of all three children. Rumors swirled for years about the nature of their arrangement, some claiming it was more transactional than romantic. But for Paris, none of those whispers held meaning. What mattered was the man who raised her, who read to her, who built an entire world around her at the sprawling acres of Neverland Ranch. After Michael's death, when that world collapsed overnight, Paris and her brothers found refuge in the arms of their grandmother, Catherine Jackson, and their cousin Tito Joe Jackson, known in the family as TJ. Growing up inside the kingdom of Neverland was not like growing up anywhere else on Earth. The property sprawled across 2,700 acres of California landscape, a place that seemed conjured from a dream, complete with animals, amusement rides, and endless open space. And yet, for all its fantasy, Michael Jackson ran a disciplined household within those gates. Paris has recalled in interviews that the rides and attractions were not simply available on demand. She and her siblings attended school every day. They were expected to behave, to apply themselves, to earn their leisure time. If they failed to meet their father's expectations during the week, the weekend privileges, the cinema trips, the time with the animals were gone. It was, in its own unconventional way, a structured and principled upbringing. But what happened next in Paris's education was perhaps the most unconventional aspect of all. For the first 12 years of her life, Paris was homeschooled. She did not attend a traditional school, did not sit in a classroom with other children her age, did not navigate the ordinary social landscape of growing up. Michael made this choice deliberately, determined to shield his children from the relentless machinery of public life. Paris has said she holds no resentment about this. She understood, even as a child, that her father was trying to give her something he himself had never been allowed to have. a childhood with some semblance of privacy, of normalcy, of peace. Her father was intensely serious about education despite the unconventional method. He created incentive systems to encourage reading. For every 5 books Paris finished, she earned 5 toys from Toys R Us. He wanted her to love learning, not simply endure it. Michael's approach to knowledge extended well beyond academics. He traveled extensively with Paris and exposed her to the full complexity of the world. Not only its glamour, but its grit. He took her to places far removed from the gilded world of celebrity. He spoke to her honestly about history, refusing to sanitize uncomfortable truths. When the subject of Christopher Columbus arose, Michael did not offer a heroic narrative. He explained what Columbus had done to indigenous peoples. He told his daughter the truth, even when it was difficult, even when she was young. Paris has credited this honesty as one of the most formative gifts her father gave her. The understanding that the world is not always beautiful, and that awareness of its darkness is itself a form of strength. This is the part most people never hear about. Michael Jackson, the man who wore sequined gloves and moonwalked across stadium stages, was also a cook. Behind the closed doors of their home, away from cameras, away from the mythology, he prepared meals for his children. There was a personal chef on staff, a man named Neil, but Michael cooked for the joy of it. He was particularly proud of his fried chicken, which he claimed, without apparent irony, was the finest in the world. For Paris, those kitchen sessions were not simply about food, they were about connection. The stove became a place where Michael Jackson, the icon, disappeared entirely, replaced by her father, talking, laughing, passing down something unquantifiable through the simple act of cooking together. The tattoos Paris wears today are a living archive of those early years. On her clavicle, the words faith, trust, and pixie dust. A reference to Peter Pan, a character Michael adored, and a nod to Paris's own childhood nickname, Tinkerbell. Elsewhere on her body, words drawn from a letter Michael wrote to her, calling her the queen of his heart. Her piercings carry symbolism too, a sunburst, a feather, a dragon, each one tethered to a specific memory, a specific feeling, a specific moment between a father and a daughter that the rest of the world was never allowed to witness. Behind closed doors, the story looked very different than what the tabloids ever imagined. Michael also ensured that, despite their extraordinary circumstances, his children experienced ordinary life. He took them to Chuck E. Cheese. He organized movie nights with junk food. He let them be kids inside the bubble he had constructed around them. He was meticulous about keeping them humble, reminding them constantly that wealth and fame were not measures of worth, that kindness mattered more than acclaim. Prince Jackson has acknowledged that their upbringing may have appeared unusual from the outside, but from within, it felt like being raised by a father who trusted his own judgment and loved his children without reservation. Paris has echoed this sentiment repeatedly. Her father, she has said, was the best parent she could have imagined. On June 25, 2009, the world stopped. Michael Jackson died at his home in Los Angeles. The cause was cardiac arrest, triggered by a lethal combination of medications administered by his personal physician. He was 50 years old. Paris was 11. In a single afternoon, the man who had been the center of her universe was gone, and the protective barrier he had spent her entire childhood constructing collapsed instantly around her. The press that had circled from a distance now moved in. The cameras that had always been somewhere nearby were now everywhere. And Paris, who had spent her whole life being shielded from the full weight of her father's fame, was suddenly standing at the center of it, grieving in public, raw and exposed. What no one realized at the time was the extent of the damage that grief would do. In 2010, Paris and her brother Prince appeared alongside their grandmother Catherine and cousin TJ in an interview with Oprah Winfrey. Paris, tears running down her face, told Oprah that her father had been the best parent imaginable from the moment she was born. That same year, she and Prince accepted a Career Achievement Award on their father's behalf. She was 12 years old and already navigating a world that was far too large for the space she occupied within it. She enrolled at Buckley School, an elite private institution in Sherman Oaks, California, where she threw herself into American football, softball, and cheerleading. the rhythms of a normal adolescence grafted onto a life that was anything but normal. But what happened next would change everything. The grief that Paris carried was not manageable. Beneath the surface of her public appearances, something was fracturing. She began struggling with her mental health in ways that were serious, alarming, and invisible to most of the world. She developed anxiety severe enough to trigger episodes resembling PTSD, panic attacks set off by loud sounds, by the relentless intrusion of paparazzi, by the hypervigilance that had calcified inside her since childhood. The masks her father had made her wear in public, a habit she had once found odd, now made a particular kind of sense to her. They had been a form of mercy. Without them, she was simply a grief-stricken child exposed to a world that did not know how to look away. During her early teenage years, Paris struggled with substance abuse and made multiple attempts to end her life. She has spoken about this with remarkable candor in the years since, not to dramatize her suffering, but to acknowledge it as a real and defining part of her story. To address what she was going through, she was sent to a therapeutic boarding school in Utah, where she spent her sophomore and junior years of high school. At first, she credited the school with helping her through her darkest period, but in October 2020, after Paris Hilton released her documentary, This Is Paris, in which Hilton described being subjected to verbal and physical abuse at the Provo Canyon School, Paris Jackson came forward on Instagram to share that she had experienced similar abuses at her own therapeutic institution. She spoke of ongoing PTSD, of nightmares, of an inability to trust that had taken years to begin to heal. Paris Jackson did not ease into public life. She stepped into it fully formed, carrying the weight of her name with a self-possession that surprised observers who had expected fragility. In January 2017, she appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, a moment that announced her arrival as a public figure in her own right. That same year in March, she signed a modeling contract with IMG Models, one of the most prestigious agencies in the world. She made her acting debut with a guest role on the Fox series Star, and in 2018 followed that with her first film appearance in the movie Gringo. On the surface, it looked like success. Underneath, something was breaking, and something else was being built. Music was always the truest expression of who Paris was. In June 2018, she and singer Gabriel Glenn formed a duo called the Soundflowers, performing their first concert at the Canyon Sessions. Their original songs, including Daisy and In the Blue, revealed a gentler, more acoustic sensibility than the world might have expected from someone raised in the kingdom of pop. They released their self-titled EP on June 24, 2020, Paris on ukulele and vocals, Glenn on acoustic guitar. It was intimate, personal, and entirely on their own terms. But Paris's ambitions extended beyond the duo. In 2019, she confirmed her role in the third season of VH1's Scream and took on the unexpected role of playing Jesus Christ in the independent film Habit. That same year, she signed with Republic Records, releasing her debut single Let Down in October, followed by her first full-length album, Wilted, in November. The record was an exercise in emotional honesty, a meditation on grief, identity, and survival, delivered through a hushed indie folk lens that bore almost no resemblance to the music her father had made famous. This is the part most people never hear about. In a 2020 documentary series called Unfiltered, Paris Jackson and Gabriel Glenn, audiences were given access to the process behind the music. Sessions in recording studios, conversations with her vocal coach about the difficulty of fully surrendering to performance, of letting go of the self-protective shell she had spent years constructing. Paris spoke openly about the pressure that followed her. Not just the pressure of expectation, but the pressure of a name that preceded her into every room she entered. She acknowledged that being perceived as Michael Jackson's daughter was both an inheritance and a burden, and that the work of becoming Paris Jackson, a separate, full, autonomous person, was ongoing and difficult and worth every moment. In June 2022, she and her brother Prince attended the 75th Tony Awards together to support MJ the Musical, a Broadway production celebrating their father's career. The show took home 4 awards, including Best Actor in a Musical for Miles Frost's portrayal of Michael Jackson. Paris and Prince introduced a performance from the show, and had previously attended its opening night at the Neil Simon Theater in New York, accompanied by their cousin TJ, the son of Tito Jackson. It was, in its own quiet way, an act of love. Children standing in public to honor the man who had shaped them, offering applause for a version of their father rendered by someone else's hands. The Jackson family's internal world has never been simple, and Paris's place within it has at times been deeply complicated. For more than a decade, a quiet but persistent rift existed between Paris and her aunt, Janet Jackson. Their relationship, already complex by the nature of the Jackson family's dynamics, was pushed to a breaking point by an incident in the summer of 2012, when Paris became concerned that her grandmother Catherine had disappeared. After an 8-day absence with no clear explanation of her whereabouts, Paris publicly sounded the alarm. CNN eventually confirmed that Catherine was fine, but the situation escalated dramatically when Paris and Prince reportedly confronted their relatives directly, with Janet allegedly attempting to take Paris's phone during the encounter. The moment was ugly, raw, and very public, and it left marks that took years to fade. Behind closed doors, the story looked very different from the united front the family occasionally presented. A later report alleged that T.J. Jackson, who had been designated as a guardian for the Jackson children, had been accused by Catherine of keeping her isolated during the incident. The accusations flew in multiple directions, and the fallout shaped Paris's relationships within the extended family for years. She was said to be considering boycotting Janet's 2019 wedding. When Joe Jackson died in 2018, reports emerged that Paris had missed the ceremony in which Janet received her Billboard Icon Award, and Paris took to Instagram to assert that these were family matters and that outsiders had no standing to judge. Janet notably did not follow Paris on Instagram during this period, even as Paris continued to follow her aunt. Then in January 2022, a shift occurred. Paris expressed publicly that she was open to collaborating with Janet on future music projects. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. There were no tearful embraces photographed for the press, but it was something, a hand extended across a long silence, a signal that the bitterness, however deep, did not have to be permanent. The most candid window into Paris Jackson's inner life came not from a press release or a carefully managed interview, but from a conversation with Willow Smith on the Facebook Watch series Red Table Talk in June 2021. Seated across from her friend, Paris spoke with the unguarded honesty of someone who has survived enough to no longer fear the telling. She described the PTSD she still carries from years of paparazzi harassment, the hypervigilance, the panic attacks, the way certain sounds or situations could collapse the distance between the present and her worst moments. She talked about what has helped: music, affirmations, therapy, the slow and non-linear work of learning to trust again. What no one realized at the time was how much she had been carrying alone. Paris has also spoken openly about her identity. She identifies as multiracial but considers herself Black, a reflection of the deep immersion in African American culture that Michael cultivated in all of his children. Despite her appearance, she has said, her father made it a point to connect her to that heritage, to instill pride and a sense of belonging that transcended what the world saw when it looked at her. In July 2018, when a Twitter user asked her directly whether she was bisexual, Paris clarified that she had come out as bisexual at the age of 14. She expressed frustration at having her identity questioned, noting that her connection to the LGBTQ+ community was not new or performative. She had known she had feelings for girls since she was 8 years old. In her documentary series, she elaborated further, noting that she had dated more women than men, but declined to apply a fixed label to her sexuality, describing her orientation in terms of people rather than categories. And then, without warning, everything collapsed. In March 2019, tabloid reports emerged claiming that Paris Jackson had attempted suicide and been placed on a psychiatric hold. Paris denied the reports, calling the information false. But the episode, real or distorted, reflected the narrative that had shadowed her for years. A young woman in the middle of a very public struggle to survive, to define herself, to exist outside the enormous gravitational pull of her father's legacy. The truth of what she endured during those years, in her own words, in her own time, has been far more devastating and far more human than any tabloid headline ever managed to capture. In a 2017 interview that many consider the most revealing she has ever given, Paris shared a detail so specific and so tender that it stopped the conversation entirely. At the time of Michael Jackson's death, he was wearing a bracelet, a cord and jade piece from Africa. Paris took it. She has worn it every day since. She has said in the years since that it still carries his scent. This is the kind of grief that cannot be performed or manufactured. The need to hold something that holds him, to carry on the risk the memory of a man who once held her hand through every version of herself she had been allowed to become. But what happened next would change everything about how she processes loss. Paris has described her relationship with her father as one that continues beyond death. Michael appears in her dreams frequently. She feels his presence as something consistent and real, not as a comfort she has constructed for herself, but as an actual presence that moves alongside her life. When discussing her debut album, Wilted, she acknowledged that his influence shapes her art in ways both conscious and invisible. That everything she makes partially through him, partially because of what he taught her about the courage it takes to create something honest and put it into the world. She has also spoken about what Michael tried to give her that he never had himself, a sense of normalcy. A father who reached the heights he did at the age he did, who had his own childhood consumed by rehearsal schedules and performance pressure, spent years trying to reconstruct something for his children that had been taken from him before he could understand what it was. Paris sees this clearly now in ways she couldn't at 11. The homeschooling, the masks, the rules, the structure, the fried chicken. All of it was love made practical. All of it was a man trying to build a world that would hold his children long after he could no longer hold them himself. The truth, when it finally came out, was far darker than anyone expected, and also more beautiful. Paris Jackson stands today at the intersection of everything her father was and everything she has chosen to become. She carries his name, his artistry, his values, and his unfinished grief. She also carries her own identity, her sexuality, her activism, her music, her survival. These are not in conflict. They are, if anything, evidence of the complexity of inheritance, the way a child takes what a parent gives them and transforms it through the particularity of their own life. She has used her platform deliberately. She serves as an ambassador for both the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation and the nonprofit organization IL Los Angeles. She has participated in Black Lives Matter demonstrations, photographed holding a sign reading "Peace, Love, Justice" in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. She has spoken out about abuse within institutional settings for troubled youth. She has made herself visible on issues that matter to her, not as a celebrity making gestures, but as a person who understands what it means to have needed help and not received it in the form it was promised. On the surface, it looked like success. Underneath, something more durable was being built. Her brother Prince has followed a quieter path, more private, more deliberate in how he manages his public profile. But both of them have returned, again and again, to the work of preserving their father's memory with integrity. In 2018, they accepted a humanitarian award on Michael's behalf from the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, marking the 9th anniversary of his death. In 2022, they stood together at the Tony Awards, applauding a musical built from his life. These are not performances of grief. They are expressions of love sustained across time, across loss, across everything that has happened since the summer of 2009. Paris released her EP Lost in February 2022, featuring a collaboration with the artist Camped titled Lost, alongside solo tracks including Breathe Again and Never Back Again. In June of that year, she released the single Lighthouse, a track with an unmistakable 1990s grunge energy, an homage to Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, two figures whose music had seeped into her through the broad musical education Michael had given her. He had loved the Beatles, he had loved classical, he had loved jazz, hip-hop, R&B, Motown, soft rock. He had handed all of it to Paris, who absorbed it and turned it into something entirely her own. In October 2022, she released another single, Just You. In 2021, she appeared in American Horror Story, double feature on FX, playing the role of Maya in the first story of the spin-off series, American Horror Stories. In the same year, she and Gabriel Glenn received Best Music honors at the Top Indie Film Awards for their track Notes on a Ghost, featured in Alexander Bruckner's film The Passenger. What no one realized at the time was that every project, every performance, every public admission was Paris constructing herself, carefully, persistently, into someone who exists fully in her own right. Michael Jackson's estate, at the time of his death in 2009, was buried beneath approximately $500 million in debt. What followed was one of the most remarkable financial recoveries in entertainment history. Directed by executors John Branca and John McClane, the estate generated over $2 billion in the years after his passing. In 2016, they sold Michael's 50% stake in the Sony ATV music publishing catalog, which included the rights to an enormous library of Beatles songs, for $750 million. In February 2024, a 50% interest in his MJOJ music company sold for $600 million. A catalog that encompasses not only Michael's own recordings, but thousands of songs by artists ranging from Sly and the Family Stone to Ray Charles. Primary Wave Music retained a 10% stake throughout. After executor fees and taxes, the estate is estimated to have distributed approximately $500 million. Roughly $200 million split between his three children, $200 million to his mother Catherine, and $100 million to children's charities. Paris, Prince, and Biggie each stand to receive approximately $67 million from their father's estate when the time comes, in addition to whatever they have built through their own endeavors. Paris herself, through her modeling contracts, acting roles, music career, and brand partnerships, has built a net worth estimated at $150 million. And yet none of it, not the money, not the legacy, not the global mythology, is the thing Paris reaches for when she needs to feel close to her father. She reaches for a bracelet, a cord and jade bracelet worn every day since June 25, 2009. She says it still carries his scent. The candid revelations Paris Jackson has offered over the years do not simplify the story of Michael Jackson. They deepen it. They restore to the man behind the myth a dimensionality that public life so often strips away. He was imperfect, as all people are. He was extraordinary, as very few people are. And he was a father, fully, tenderly, devotedly, to a daughter who grew up to confirm what many of us had always believed, that the most human version of him lived not on stage, not in the headlines, but in the quiet spaces he created for his children, where no camera could follow and no judgment could reach. What do you make of Paris Jackson's admissions over the years? How do you think these revelations reshape the way we see her and the way we see the man who raised her? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.